In this video, I want to focus on what happened to the northern tribes between 722 BC when they were relocated and 612 BC, which is when I believe they departed for Assyria, which we know as the Americas. To do this, we'll go back to around 800 BC when God first prophesied on the fall of the Assyrians that would take place in 612 BC through the prophet Jonah. We all know Jonah because of the story of him being in the belly of the fish for 3 days, but we don't often hear that the reason God did this to him was because of a commandment that he disobeyed. I'll read the book of Jonah from chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa. And he found a ship going to Tarshish, so he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it, to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So instead of going to Nineveh, which would end up the final capital city of the Assyrian Empire, he tried to escape to Tarshish. We know he received this prophecy around 800 BC through reading the book of 2 Kings chapter 14, and I'll read from verses 23 to 25. In the 15th year of Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria, and reigned 41 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not from all the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. He restored the coast of Israel, from the entering of Hamath unto the sea of the plain, according to the word of the Lord God of Israel, which he spake by the hand of his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, which was of Gath-hepher. Jeroboam II began to reign in 826 BC, although Assyrian records place his reign from 790 BC, which is why I give an estimate of 800 BC for Jonah's prophecy. So knowing this, we can look at what happened with Jonah in chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. And the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go unto Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee. We know what was bid Jonah from chapter 1, verse 2. Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. So their sins now need to be paid for. So Jonah preaches of the city's destruction, and I'll pick up in verse 5 in chapter 3. So the people of Nineveh believed God, and proclaimed a fast, and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them even to the least of them. So because they did this, God did not punish them at that time. I'll read verse 10. And God saw their works, that they turned from their evil way, and God repented of the evil that he had said that he would do unto them, and he did it not. So this is what some people misunderstand about God's prophecies. Nineveh's sin still must be paid for, and what God says will always come true. I'll read Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6. For I am the Lord, I change not, therefore ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. So Jonah's prophecy of the destruction for Nineveh would be for a latter time, or 612 BC to be exact, which would allow for the tribes of the northern kingdom to make their way to the Americas. This prophecy would have come just around the same time of the prophecies of Hosea, where we knew the northern kingdom would be taken into slavery by the Assyrians. I'll read Hosea chapter 9 and verse 3. They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim, and this is referring to the northern kingdom, shall return to Egypt, and they shall eat unclean things in Assyria. Now we know the northern kingdom did not return to literal Egypt, as Egypt is a synonym for slavery in the Bible. I'll read Exodus chapter 20 and verse 2. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. I'll also get the book of Micah chapter 6 and verse 4. For I brought thee up out of the land of Egypt, and redeemed thee out of the house of servants, and I sent before thee Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Plus we also know from Deuteronomy chapter 17 verse 16 that we would not go back into slavery into Egypt again. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. And we can also confirm this back in the book of Hosea in chapter 11, and we're going to read verses 3 to 5. I taught Ephraim also to go, taking them by their arms, but they knew not that I healed them. I drew them with cords of a man, and with bands of love, and I was to them as they that take off the yoke of their jaws, and I laid meat unto them. He shall not return into the land of Egypt, but the Assyrian shall be his king, because they refused to return. In 722 BC, the capital of the Assyrian Empire was Nimrod, but by the end of the northern kingdom's captivity, it would be Nineveh. So now we can look at other prophecies to show what would happen to Nineveh during this time. Nahum prophesied at the time when Nineveh was the capital. I'll read the book of Nahum chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 1 to 3. The burden of Nineveh. Burden is just destruction. The book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. God is jealous, and the Lord revengeth. The Lord revengeth and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserveth wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger, and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord have his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. So the Most High here lets us know that he is slow to anger, but will not acquit the wicked. This is the delayed judgment of Nineveh. I find it interesting what it reads in verse 8. But with an overrunning flood, he will make an utter end of the place thereof, and darkness shall pursue his enemies. I mentioned in previous videos of the reports from Theodorus that the Tigris River flooded Nineveh in 612 BC during the battle that helped the Babylonians and the Medes to defeat the Assyrians. Zephaniah prophesied about 10 years before the battle, and I'm going to read his book from chapter 2 and verse 13. And he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and will make Nineveh a desolation, and dry like a wilderness. So the Most High was always going to do what he said in the book of Jonah. All sins must be paid for eventually. We are also fortunate enough to have the account of Tobit, who lived in Nineveh during the Assyrian captivity. I'll read Tobit chapter 1, I'm going to read verses 1 and 2. The book of the words of Tobit, son of Tobiel, the son of Ananiel, the son of Aduel, the son of Gabael, of the seed of Asael, of the tribe of Naphtali, who in the time of Enemeser, king of the Assyrians, was led captive out of Thisbe, which is at the right hand of that city, which is called properly Naphtali, in Galilee above Asher. Enemeser here is Sargon II. It was during his time that the northern kingdom was deported, though Salmanassar V took Samaria, and we could read that in 2nd Ezra chapter 13 and verse 40. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanassar, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. Salmanassar died in the same year he defeated Israel and took Samaria, and it was Sargon II who was most likely responsible for completing the deportation of the northern tribes, and he also takes credit for capturing Samaria himself. But we know it was Salmanassar V that launched the campaign, as Babylonian texts also state that Salmanassar was the one to take Samaria. But we'll get back to Tobit, as he lets us know more about the fate of the northern tribes during the captivity. I'll read verses 3 to 6 back in chapter 1. I, Tobit, have walked all the days of my life in the ways of truth and justice, and I did many almsdeeds to my brethren and my nation, whom came with me to Nineveh, into the land of the Assyrians. And when I was in mine own country, in the land of Israel, being but young, all the tribe of Naphtali, my father, fell from the house of Jerusalem, which was chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, that all the tribes should sacrifice there, where the temple of the habitation of the Most High was consecrated, and built for all ages. Now all the tribes together which revolted, and the house of my father Naphtali sacrificed unto the heifer Baal. But I alone went often to Jerusalem at the feast, as it was ordained unto all the people of Israel by an everlasting decree, having the first fruits and tenths of increase, with that which was first shorn, and them gave I at the altar to the priests, the children of Aaron. So he was a Naphthalite. The tribe of Naphtali would eventually end up sharing South America with the tribe of Asher. He was deported to Nineveh but would still travel to Jerusalem for the feast days, and because of this, the Most High blessed him. I'll read verses 9 to 14. Furthermore, when I was come to the age of a man, I married Anna of mine own kindred, and of her I begat Tobias. And when we were carried away captives to Nineveh, all my brethren and those that were of my kindred did eat of the bread of the Gentiles, but I kept myself from eating, because I remembered God with all of my heart. And the Most High gave me grace and favor before Enemessar, so that I was his purveyor. And I went into Media, and left in trust with Gabael, the brother of Gabrias, at Rages, a city of the Medes, 10 talents of silver. So we see here other Naphtalites living in other cities of Media, as we know from 2 Kings chapter 17 and verse 6. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. So we'll go back to Tobit chapter 1 and read verse 15. Now when Enemessar was dead, Sennacherib his son reigned in his stead, whose estate was troubled that I could not go into Media. This is how we know Enemessar is Sargon II. He was the father of Sennacherib. So Tobit would bury the dead Israelites that Sennacherib would slay and leave in the streets, but this soon got him in trouble. Verse 19, and I'll read to 22. And when one of the Ninevites went and complained of me to the king, that I buried them and hid myself, understanding that I was sought for to be put to death, I withdrew myself for fear. Then all my goods were forcibly taken away, neither was there anything left me beside my wife Anna and my son Tobias. And there passed not 55 days before 2 of his sons killed him, and they fled into the mountains of Ararat. And Sarchedonus his son reigned in his stead, who appointed over his father's accounts, and over all his affairs, Achiacharus my brother Anael's son. And Achiacharus entreating for me, I returned to Nineveh. Now Achiacharus was cupbearer and keeper of the signet, and steward, and overseer of the accounts, and Sarchedonus appointed him next unto him, and he was my brother's son. Sennacherib was killed by his sons in 681 BC. And the reason this is important is because we have a time frame for when this all takes place. After this happened, Tobit commanded his son to relocate to Ecbatane, another city in Media, where he met his wife. He said this in Tobit chapter 14 and verse 4. Go into Media, my son, for I surely believe those things which Jonah the prophet spake of Nineveh, that it shall be overthrown, and that for a time peace shall rather be in Media, and that our brethren shall lie scattered in the earth from that good land, and Jerusalem shall be desolate, and the house of God in it shall be burned, and shall be desolate for a time. So he is predicting that Jonah's prophecy will come true about Nineveh, and that the city of the Medes would be the starting point from where the northern kingdom would spread across the world. We also see that he prophesies that the temple at Jerusalem would be burnt at least 50 years before it actually happened. I'll just finish in verses 12 to 15. This is referring now to Tobias his son. And when Anna his mother was dead, he buried her with his father. But Tobias departed with his wife and his children to Ecbatane, to Raguel his father-in-law, where he became old with honor. And he buried his father and mother-in-law honorably, and he inherited their substance and his father Tobit's. And he died at Ecbatane in Media, being 127 years old. But before he died, he heard of the destruction of Nineveh, which was taken by Nebuchadnezzar and Assyrians. And before his death, he rejoiced over Nineveh. So he lived in the cities of the Medes, right around the Caspian Sea, where we know the northern kingdom were placed before making their way to the Americas. I'll read 2 Ezra 13 again, verses 40 and 41. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoner out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanassar the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so they came into another land. But they took counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen, that's the city of the Medes, and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. And I'll just jump down to verse 44. For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood, till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of 1.5 years, and the same region is called Ashereth. We already went through the possible flooding in the region in 612 BC, but the greater significance of this journey is that this is the location where Haplogroup Q originates, who were the first people to inhabit the Americas. Now, scientific consensus claims Haplogroup Q originated 29,000 years ago and is descended from Haplogroup P. Let me first dispel the age. All dating for haplogroups are theoretical. First assuming evolution happened in the way that we have been told, then applying statistical models to the theories based on an assumption of the rate of mutation, thus giving exaggerated timescales. They admit as much in the literature, although of course they would not agree that the assumptions imposed by the proposed models overinflates the timescales. I'll give an example of how I believe they have done this. My haplogroup is haplogroup E, and estimated to be about 70,000 years old, originating in Eurasia. This would trace the migration of my population group back through the West Indies, then to West Africa, and then through Israel, having happened over about 60,000 years, approximately. A far greater timescale than it took for us to become a nation about 3,500 years ago. However, we know through the work of Priya Morjani from the Department of Genetics, a Harvard student, that when she looked at similarities between the 8 Jewish sects or ethnogroups, for example, the Ashkenazi, the Mizrahi, the Sephardic, etc., the only thing that linked all 8 groups together would be that they all mixed with a certain African population group approximately 72 generations ago, which would suggest that Iron Age Israel would have been inhabited with this group. Or to put it another way, before the Babylonian captivity, people who we identify today as Africans were living in Israel and would have been known as Israelites. So this is a way, without using molecular clocks and mutation rates, to verify the time it took for my haplogroup to migrate through Africa from Israel. We didn't migrate into Africa from the Middle East 60,000 years ago, only to repeat the same migration pattern again 2,000 years ago. Likewise, Haplogroup Q did not migrate from the region around the Caspian Sea 29,000 years ago, only to repeat that exact journey in 612 BC. That would be a massive coincidence. I'll now address homology and its use within phylogeny. This is a model that works on the assumption that we come from a common ancestor without taking into consideration that a common designer could be the reason for homology as well. And when we use molecular evidence to try to support homology, we still have no evidence that we come from a common ancestor. Despite all of this, we create a phylogenetic tree of haplogroups that show extended timelines and the parent-child relationships between haplogroups. But we have to remember, haplogroups represent population genetics. It's the study of a movement of a population group. It doesn't represent an homogeneous population. While we can make assumptions about the degree to which a haplogroup can represent a single ethnic group, we cannot be sure. But even if you take all this into consideration and you have faith that the science is on the right track when it comes to phylogeny specifically, then belief in phylogeny, because that's what it is at this point, it's not proven, would mean you must reject the Bible. There are some people like Nathaniel Jeanson that claim that the mtDNA branches of the phylogenetic tree represent the 3 sons of Noah. This is untrue. He misrepresents the data by showing an unrooted phylogenetic tree, and evolutionary scientists have already rooted this tree to illustrate there aren't 3 branches representing 3 Noah's children. Population genetics has its place in showing the movements of our people, but phylogeny must be rejected as it relies heavily on the assumption of common ancestry, with no evidence to support this. Take, for instance, this paper. It clearly shows a split occurred between haplogroup E and haplogroup D. Haplogroup D can be found in Tibetan Chinese and the Ainu of Japan. We identify these nations biblically as the Moabites and the Ammonites, the children of Lot. When we read Genesis chapter 13 from verse 8, we see these two groups go their separate ways. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separate themselves the one from the other. It's almost as if this academic paper shows this exact account of the separation of these groups that would have taken place nearly 4,000 years ago, not the tens of thousands that this paper implies due to molecular dating methods. With Abraham and Lot being close relatives, we cannot assume haplogroups are made up of pure ethnicities, as you would almost have to assume by accepting phylogeny into the study of population genetics. I find population genetics interesting, but we have to be careful to separate what can factually be proved from what is still theoretical, no matter how widespread that theoretical belief is. I think I've made my point without getting too in-depth about how we can use DNA to prove who we are. This will be my final video on the Tribe of Asher Origin series. With these 4 videos, you'll always be able to come back to them and ground yourself in the knowledge of who you are. After this, I advise understanding the law and applying it to your life. It was designed with you in mind. I still have to do Isaiah and Ezekiel's prophecy for the Northern Kingdom, which I'll do separately. But these 4 videos are a great introduction into understanding who you are and a reminder that God chose you to be one of His set apart. All praises to the Most High.